Hey everyone! Welcome back. Today we're going to dive headfirst into the dark, yet incredibly compelling, basements of the human soul. We're talking about a book that redefined Russian literature and still haunts the minds of millions of readers worldwide. Fyodor Dostoevsky's great novel, Crime and Punishment. This is not just a detective story or a social drama. It's a genuine psychological thriller about conscience, the limits of what is permissible, and what happens when one dangerous, yet grand, idea is born in the mind of a genius. What personally fascinates me about this book is how Dostoevsky literally dissects his protagonist. He turns his thoughts, fears, and inner struggle inside out. Trust me, after reading it, you won't be able to look at the world the same way again. If you thought this was just boring high school classic, prepare for a complete reassessment. In this video, I'll tell you why this book became a landmark and how a single student revolutionized our understanding of good and evil. Meet Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov, a former student and intellectual, highly intelligent but incredibly poor. He lives in St. Petersburg, in a tiny room that looks more like a coffin than a home, where even breathing is difficult. Dostoevsky's Petersburg is not about grand avenues. It's about the yellow, suffocating, smelly streets, the poverty, and the hopelessness. The city is oppressive, and this pressure is mirrored in Rodion's soul. He is obsessed with one thought, one theory, which he once published in a small article. The essence of his theory, to put it simply, is that all people are divided into two types. The first type are the trembling creatures, passive individuals who simply live by the law and are incapable of anything great. And the second type are the extraordinary people, the geniuses, the Napoleons, those who push history forward. And these special people, he believes, are allowed, permitted to step over the law, even to shed blood, if it's necessary for a great cause to save thousands. This is, of course, an incredibly dangerous and arrogant idea. But fundamentally, Raskolnikov is just looking for a justification for himself. And here enters his future victim, the old pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna. She is vile, greedy, exploits her miserable sister Lizaveta, and cheats the last pennies out of the poor. Raskolnikov convinces himself. She is evil, a weed, her death will benefit society, and most importantly, he can use her money to save his family and finish his studies. My personal take. He doesn't want the money as much as he wants to test himself. He wants to know, who is he, a trembling creature, or one who has the right? A kind of philosophical experiment, but with an axe in his hand. And this internal conflict, this whisper of pride, drives him to plan. He walks, measures his steps, rehearses. What always impresses me about this part is how, on the border of sanity and madness, a human being can plan the most terrible act. Such a brilliant mind, such a fine organization of soul, and all of it directed toward a cold-blooded murder. He, the poor idealist, preparing to become an assassin. The temptation of a grand idea. It is always terrifying when intellectual arrogance attempts to replace morality. And then the day arrives. Everything goes wrong. The murder of the pawnbroker happens, and it's no longer a philosophical experiment, but a dirty, disgusting deed. He acts in a fever, in a kind of haze. But then a double catastrophe occurs. The meek Lizaveta, the pawnbroker's sister who was completely innocent, returns unexpectedly. And Raskolnikov, to avoid exposure, kills her too. What a twist! One sin drags another along. He who planned to save the world now understands in the basement of his soul. He didn't just kill evil, he also killed innocence. He grabs a handful of stolen jewels, barely using them. The money immediately loses all meaning. The true punishment begins not in prison, but right here and now in his head. After the murder, the real fever starts. Outwardly, he is sick, barely conscious, and inside, he is torn apart by terror, paranoia, and a feeling of complete isolation from the world. He hides the stolen goods under a stone in the yard, barely touching them. This emphasizes the point. It wasn't about the money, it was about the idea. And here Dostoevsky begins his masterful game. He brings Raskolnikov into contact with two key figures. The first is Marmeladov, a drunken clerk, who embodies the very poverty and humiliation from which Raskolnikov wanted to save himself and the world. And his daughter Sonia Marmeladova, a young woman who, to feed her family, is forced into prostitution, but who at the same time maintains an incredible purity, faith, and most importantly, a capacity for compassion. It's a stunning contrast. A sinner with a pure soul and an idealist with a blood-stained one. Raskolnikov, even before Marmeladov's tragedy, helps his family, giving them his last money. He is still a good person. And this constant oscillation between good and evil, between arrogance and mercy, is the heart of the novel. He tries to be a Napoleon, but as soon as he sees someone else's pain, he immediately turns into an ordinary, compassionate human being. The crime destroyed not only the victim's life but the murderer's soul. The punishment is not the court, but his own conscience, which prevents him from sleeping, eating, or living. Next, the third key figure enters the game. The investigator Porfiry Petrovich. He is not a dull policeman but a subtle psychologist who immediately realizes that the murderer is Raskolnikov. But he has no direct evidence, only psychological intuition. He begins to play an elegant, predatory game with Rodion. The scenes of their interrogation are pure intellectual pleasure. Porfiry doesn't pressure. He circles, asking questions about Raskolnikov's article on the extraordinary people. He literally forces Rodion to betray himself through his nervousness and pride. It's a duel in which the investigator is simply waiting for the criminal to self-destruct. In parallel, the storyline with Sonia Marmeladova unfolds. Raskolnikov sees a kindred spirit in her because she, too, sacrificed herself for others. He shares his torment, his crime with her. And here Dostoevsky's main voice resonates. Sonia does not condemn him. She doesn't scream for retribution. She calls him to suffering. This is perhaps the most important thought in the novel. Dostoevsky does not believe in easy forgiveness. He believes that redemption is only possible through pain, through public confession, through the acceptance of suffering. Sonia gives him a cross, a symbol of his burden and path, and says, "Go stand at the crossroads, bow down to the Russian people, kiss the earth and tell everyone, 'I have killed.'" This is incredibly difficult for his proud nature, but it is the only way to rebirth. His mother, his sister Dunya's fiancée, they are all drawn into this whirlpool. His sister is ready to marry the unpleasant but rich Luzin to save her brother from poverty. Raskolnikov, seeing the sacrifices made for him, understands his guilt more and more. He is not a Napoleon. He is simply a man who caused pain. And his great idea collapses before his eyes, leaving only bitterness and shame. Punishment from the outside is just a formality. True redemption begins with an internal readiness to accept suffering and admit guilt to people, not just to oneself. Porfiry Petrovich gives Raskolnikov one last chance. He almost begs him to surrender without waiting for arrest because it would give him the opportunity to ease his burden, to strike a deal with his conscience. And Rodion finally decides, not out of fear, but because he can no longer endure the hell in his own head. And of course for Sonia's sake. He goes to the crossroads as she asked. He kisses the dirty Petersburg earth, taking his step toward public repentance. It is an incredibly powerful, purifying scene. He surrenders to the authorities and is sent to a penal colony in Siberia. And here Dostoevsky does a beautiful thing. He doesn't end the novel with the trial. He shows us Raskolnikov's life in the penal colony. At first, he is still proud. He despises the other convicts, even avoiding Sonia, who followed him. He believes his crime was a mistake, but not a sin. He still clings to his Napoleonic idea. But then gradually, through Sonia's love, through her infinite, quiet presence, a shift begins to happen in his heart. He falls ill, and when he recovers, he looks at Sonia, at the gospel she gave him, and for the first time in his life, he feels not arrogance, but love and remorse. Dostoevsky doesn't give us a full description of his redemption. He only leads us to its beginning. He says, "But that is the beginning of a new story, the story of the gradual renewal of a man, the story of his gradual regeneration, his gradual transition from one world to another, his acquaintance with a new, hitherto completely unknown reality." This is the end of Crime and Punishment. The book is not about how to commit a crime, but about what happens after. It is about the fact that no great idea is worth a human life, and that a person cannot be happy until they make peace with their conscience. What personally impresses me about this book is Dostoevsky's eternal optimism. Yes, he led us through darkness, through murder, through pain. But he showed that even the most fallen person, blinded by pride, is capable of rebirth through love, suffering, and humility. This is a book about how light always breaks through the thickest darkness. If you haven't read Crime and Punishment yet, I highly recommend it. It's heavy but incredibly important food for the mind and soul. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Let me know in the comments which other classic novel I should analyze next. See you soon.